Nice, welcome back everybody. Apologies for the slight delay in that, we're just having to get the mics exchanged and so forth. But we are back and we are ready to go with our what is now our final panel of the afternoon. And that, I know, it's a very sad day. It's a very sad day. So, I would like to welcome all of our guests for this final panel. That is the sustainability in utilities and why edge technology is important. Our three speakers are Glenda Duggan, Managing Director at Accenture. We have Karin Meurk-Harvey, who's the Chief Commercial Officer at Smart DCC, and Tilly Gilbert, Principal Consultant and Edge Practice Lead at STL Partners. So a warm welcome to all of them, please. So it is the standard way of doing things. We will have our chat first. They will ask questions of each other, which is always good because it means I don't have to do it. And we'll then take questions from the room and any coming in online as well. So the place I want to start is anything that comes to technology. There can often be lots and lots of things, lots of terms that get thrown around that people don't fully understand. So let's fill in a few gaps for people first. Let's start with edge technology. Let's just make sure everyone is fully up on what it is and why it's so important.
Yep, I can take that one. So the term edge is used very differently across lots of different people, across different industries, but in the very broad sense of the term, we saw a big wave of cloud computing where lots of different workloads were being moved to centralized cloud locations. Now we're seeing a trend where cloud computing continues to be a strong part of many companies' technology strategies, but they're also considering where they might need to move some of those workloads closer to end users. And very broadly, that's what we define as edge computing or edge technology. That might mean moving workloads that were in the cloud to a location closer to an end user or an end device, or it might mean offloading some compute that previously existed on a device, on a sensor, on a camera, and moving it to a nearby edge location. And there are plenty of benefits and reasons why you might do that and why you might look at a continuum from edge to cloud to support your technology strategy. It might be because the latency of the cloud is too high. It might be because the cost of running your workloads in the cloud is high, or it might be something to do with resiliency or data sovereignty, where you want to keep the data that you are producing close to your site, or definitely within the country where the data has been generated. And we see that within utilities. I think that's a trend that you guys will come on to as, one of the drivers why edge is really interesting. So that's what it is, and maybe we'll come on to it a bit more in the rest of the panel, why it's also interesting from a sustainability angle and why we talk about it supporting sustainability.
And we will clarify utilities. I know that sounds like a simple one, but it's such a wide term now. In your understanding of utilities, what are we talking about now?
You described this vast area. Look, I think the trends we're seeing in utilities and edge in particular, but they're twofold, right? They're those that are actually just around IT and compute and the tech footprint, and then there's the general trend that we're seeing in utilities around decarbonisation and why we're all here, right? And those they shift. If I really simplified, it's the how we generate and the shifting of that generation to net zero, how supply is changing. I mean, how demand is changing, and what can we do to optimise? Like we're all aware of that consumption rise that's coming, and therefore we need to optimise and how we do that the right way, right? So, this looking after vulnerable customers, sustainability, the security elements, those sorts of things. And I don't know if you take a few examples from those. So if we look at generation, there's a lot to do now, right? There's a lot of low carbon assets to get up and running and grid infrastructure to change. And what's driving a lot of those activities is very digital. So it's like, you look at some of the wind assets that are being built. Nobody wants to build twice, right? And digital twins and looking at some of the aspects to build quickly. And then once you've built the safety elements that go with it, like those wind farms, and certainly the offshore wind, the latency issue is a big problem, right? And so if you can put some of that on the edge, it makes a big difference. And in infrastructure build, as in the network. The network operators are really keen not to just build more. You need to be smart about how we build it, and having the right sensors and the right sort of load control and flexibility to start managing that demand in a better way. And it's all, some of that is really important to be local, and then safety, right? In a lot of that those plants or builds or whatever, the speed at which you need to do safety elements, particularly around AI and spotting, the edge use cases in there are amazing, right? And then when you start looking at how do we manage demand, there's a lot about energy efficiency out there. There's a lot about driving efficiency that's tailored, and having it in the right areas, and whether we it's interesting as well, because it's also about tailor, it's also about the ecosystem and how you connect everyone together, and whether edge can start, the sort of clouds of clouds and the cloud continuum, they're really interesting. But we mustn't forget, and there's these big sort of regulatory elements that go with it, and they're all about doing it the right way. And those regulatory elements, the security side of it, the looking after other, and actually, I'm a utilities person, and I was frantically looking to see what Liz Truss was going to say before this meeting, and it came out a couple of hours, so I can field questions, but I've not studied it. But how are we going to deal with those situations, and what's the knock-on effect of those decisions, and actually having that blend of change in technology, so shifting to the cloud, the green cloud, making sure that what you're doing is sustainable, but also how technology is facilitating those working practices and optimization is really...
It's certainly never been more topical than it has today, I
was literally sitting with Fresh on my phone.
Couldn't have timed it better, could we?
Well, maybe you could.
Karin, I'll bring you in, and just to complete our colouring in of terms and where we are and what we're doing. Smart DC, what do you do? How do you fit into all of this?
Exactly, yes. DCC, and a lot of people don't know what DCC is actually. So it stands for Data Communication Company, and what we do is we operate Britain's smart metering system. And this smart metering system is the digital spine in the energy network. So what we do is we connect smart meters to the energy suppliers, and we do it digitally. And I mean, we're big now, and as I said, not a lot of people know what we're doing. We have, I think in August, we did over 1 billion data messages. We are in 13 million homes. We connect 22 million meters. And what it enables is that if the meters and the data from the meters can go to the energy suppliers and to the national grid, then we know, we get a detailed picture of what consumption and how we use energy in Britain. And when we do that, we can enable decarbonization by better utilization. I'll give you an example, because then it's much easier. So think you have an electrical car, you want to charge it, but you want to charge it with renewable as much as possible. So then you can, you have your solar panel on the roof, and you then charge it up to when it's finished. And you can decide then to stop. You don't need to charge it fully. You can stop, at 80% or something, or you can just take the last 15% at the grid, or you can charge it at the stage when it's much cheaper energy. So in order to get a picture, so all the consumers and all the businesses that use smart metering, they actually play a really key part in enable Britain to get the detailed pictures, how we manage and how we consume energy, and how much we use and how much we actually sell back to the grid. So that's why it's so interesting. And our purpose is, of course, to support Britain's net zero target, so we can all live greener and smarter life is the slogan.
Because really simplistically, I guess, Karin, what I understand anyway is like you've got one of the challenges is that lots of the renewable energy, like sunshine, wind, it's quite variable in when it works.
Yeah.
It works when the sun's out, or it works when it's windy.
Exactly.
A coal farm always works. You're burning it all the time. So a lot of the smart stuff that needs to happen is if you want to move more towards the renewable energy, then you need to have smarter ways to figure out how do you match supply with demand? How do you figure out when the sun is shining? How do you make sure that we're using that renewable electricity then? And when the sun isn't shining, that we're starting to try and be smarter about reducing the need
And also, how
energy
much do we
consumption
use?
then.
Do we actually use? I mean, if you don't have a smart meter, you have to go out and check the meters. Now you can see the consumption, and you can see your consumption yourself. On your little in-house display as well. And exactly as you say, Tilly, you can use the renewable energy, and then you can stop, or you can do it when it's cheaper in the night, etc. So that's really painting that picture. So it's digitalize all of that, which is a really exciting transition.
And that's a great change, because you think, well, even 5-10 years ago, that wasn't really an option.
No.
But when it comes to sustainability and talking about utilities, do any of you have any concerns that agenda could get lost in what's hitting every newspaper at the moment about the costs of things? Do you feel that could get sidelined at all when so much good work is going on at the moment?
Do you want me to? I'm not worried, actually. I think, I mean, it's interesting. The cost of living crisis is a really important one, right? And we have yet to really understand the measures that, the knock-on effect. So I don't know how many of you, I'm going to give you my really small summary, right? But effectively what Liz Truss is going to do is cap energy prices, so the consumers pay up to an amount, and then the government will pay the utility the shortfall. They're going to open up fracking, take the ban off fracking. They're going to offer licences for North Sea. Been waiting for a while, right? And then there's a bit I haven't studied enough around wind and offering up 15-year licences for the wind and 15-year contracts and how that's going to happen. And the so what of that is renewable is in the middle of it, right? Wind is the big thing, and it's supporting. But those energy companies, if you think what's going to happen, actually, to get more customers, it's not going to be about price, because the price is going to be the same. It's going to be about offerings. It's about, and if you look at the OVOs and the Octopuses of the world, they went green very, very early, 100% green. And what goes with being sustainable is also being efficient, right? And so when you've got, they do go hand in hand, and it's an unpopular statement, but you put the business case first, and then the sustainability case comes behind, and we're now starting to see the shift, right? But there is, we don't go to a C-suite meeting that sustainability isn't somewhere in that agenda. We don't, there are very few CEOs, maybe the ones who own the coal-fired power stations, maybe, but that aren't thinking about that. And we're already on that journey, and I think I've yet to see if it's going to fix it.
The renewable side of things has become such a huge selling point for now, because frankly everyone's going to have very similar bills coming in all of a sudden.
And your
that's
the differentiator is going to be about the product offering and the greenness of it. But I also think it's not just about the consumers, right? That's one element of it, but the energy transition and what we need to do to get to net zero as a country is very much about supporting, different generation methods, which these wind contracts are going to do, supporting, how do we get that energy to be 100% green and get rid of those less sustainable methods, right? And how do we drive behavioural change? And all of those, I think, will carry on.
But talking about behavioural change, there's a little box in most people's homes now, an increasing number of people's homes now, which is driving that change. I know I finally managed to get my parents to get a smart meter. This took a long time.
Thank you.
My mum is terrified of them. She is scared of anything digital.
Yeah.
She decides she can't do it. But anyway, they finally got a smart meter. And she's now physically going around the house, turning things off to see what difference it makes. Do you feel that's a pretty typical story?
It is a typical story, and I think, it's very much about, we enable this to happen, the digital, change to happen, but the other big part is the consumer behavior. Exactly said. How do you get people to change the behavior? And we have had a lot of discussion around, maybe on the smart meter you should put a goal to, how can I save to a holiday? Equivalent to how many coffees or beers or whatever it is have I saved this week? So, it's about changing the consumer behavior. Just seeing what you consume is not enough. You also need to change the behavior.
Yeah, I also know someone who's had a hot tub in their back garden. After they got a smart meter, they've not used it since.
Exactly.
I think that's fairly typical. But if we look at why edge technology is important to that, because we haven't really brought that into the conversation yet, some people might go, well, how does that make a difference in terms of sustainability? Can you join the dots for us, please?
Yeah, so I think there's two real ways to think about this. So maybe the first way is, Karin's been describing these digital smart meters that are going out into distributed across the UK. And as we try and do smarter and smarter things with those devices, we will need to collect more and more data. We'll need to be able to analyze more and more of that data. And it will be cost efficient and reliable and more resilient to do that close to where the devices are, rather than to do that all in a centralized cloud location. So Edge can come into play in enabling new digital solutions which help to drive sustainability. The other angle, the other side of things, of why people are so interested in edge computing and see that as a potential driver for sustainability, is just that edge can help to make the cloud more sustainable. So green cloud is a massive trend, something that lots of people are looking at, so that they're understanding if they can become more sustainable through running workloads in the cloud. And we need to consider edge as part of that story, because there are, every time you transmit a piece of data from one location to another location, energy is required to do that. And so if you can think much more carefully about where you should be analyzing the data, and in some instances that will still be in the cloud, and edge is really part of the cloud story, not a separate thing. But if you can think more carefully about where you're doing that data analysis, that can also have a big impact. So it's twofold. It's edge is an enabler for sustainable digital solutions, for instance, in the utility space, and then also edge as a means of helping to drive the green and sustainable cloud agenda.
Okay, when we're talking about strategy, though, we've spoken a lot about strategy in this room over the last couple of days. Glenda, what has been Accenture's strategy when it comes to sustainability, though?
Yeah, that's a bit.
I know it's a big question.
No, and I guess it's a difficult question because it's in everything, right? It's not a separate division anymore. It's in everything we do, right? That we are what you eat. I mean, we do consult in sustainability, but we're COP. We were at the last COP. Our net zero target's 2025. We've gone pretty aggressively, and actually we discovered there were things we didn't have. So we've acquired companies that had the knowledge. So we've had 5 sustainability acquisitions this year, and the messages that are really coming through about that next wave of change is that it's very much about collaboration and communities and ecosystems getting together, and so we're really keen on, because we think as consultants actually you have a bit of a role to play. It's a bit of a duty actually to start getting people together and having those, and we've been running city sprints and actually if anyone is Southend-on-Sea or Leeds, we've got them coming up soon, and please reach out to me. And what we're trying to do is get like ecosystems together, and if you look at another edge case, smart cities is a really great edge case, and the kind of linking in of cars to traffic lights to energy, there's some amazing things you can do, but actually no one party can do them, right? They've all got to go.
How difficult is it to bring those parties together, though? Yeah,
it takes work. And look, I think there's always this debate about business-led or regulatory-led, and I know Karin actually, her DCC, they do a lot of bringing parties together and have a wide ecosystem, and I don't think there's one answer, but I don't think we can all sit here and wait for it to happen. I think you can't sit here and say we know that if you think about I've got processing on the edge and I've got processing in a cloud, and of course that's going to require an ecosystem of people. If I can't get those parties together, then you're just being passive. The other thing on technology, because I'm quite conscious this was meant to be technology linked, we've started really making a shift in sustainability being a key factor in technology decisions. So we have a thing called an SQ score for every project that says how sustainable is your project. If your cloud is not supplied by green energy, then you get a bad score. And started, it's no longer something you do with just a sustainability project. It's something you do in every project, and you bring it through. And there's a lot the tech industry needs to be thinking about in sustainability. To your point earlier about green cloud, right? If we look at the predicted growth in actual carbon emissions from tech, right? We, in the tech industry, have a big responsibility to get control of that before it happens, right? And while I haven't answered Accenture's wider strategy, right, I think, we are what we eat, and certainly in the tech space, we have a responsibility to help others do that. Yeah.
Well, that has led me on perfectly to my next question. I didn't set this up, honestly. But what role does technology play in sustainability? I guess that's open to all of you, but I guess it plays a huge part in the future of this.
Yeah, and I don't think we can get the future we want without it. Right? I think in many cases it's the tools provided by that technology give you the answer. They're part of the solution. But we also need to acknowledge that we're not the saints in this equation, and if we don't take our own personal responsibility for, where are we storing the data, how are we storing the data, how quickly is it growing, then we could rapidly become the bad guy. I know you've got some great case studies on Edge, and I'll
there's a whole load of cool things you can talk about and do with technology to help from a sustainability perspective. So, one example would be, you mentioned Smart City, and there's some really interesting companies that do video analytics. So they look at what's going on in a road, in a city environment, and they will do multimodal analysis. So they're able to figure out, is it a car, is it a bus, is it a bike that's going along? And you can run analysis on that, and some of the use cases that they've come up with is that you can control the traffic lights so that you try and incentivize people to travel by bus. And what that means is that you have traffic lights that are set to the typical speed that a bus drives between two locations, which is generally slower than a car because you stop and you drop people off, and that's how you set the traffic lights. So you're more likely to get a green light if you're sat on the bus than you are if you're in the car. So that's one example of where technology is, coming into play and trying to enable a greener future. But I think Glenda's right that you have to look at the flip side of that as well, which is that, data center companies use a huge amount of energy, and on processing data takes energy. So you have to be responsible about that in terms of where you're processing the energy, where you're processing the data, whether you need to process all the data or whether you can filter some off. So part of this is loads of sensors just go, nothing's happening, and they'll send constant data just saying nothing's happening. And you only really want to be analysing it and using that data when it says something's different, and that's when you need to go, okay, what's different? Let's analyse that. You don't want to be analysing all that data that just says, I'm fine, I'm behaving normally. So, there's all sorts of things you have to do to make sure that technology is a positive enabler of sustainable solutions. And that's almost a whole panel in and of itself, probably discussing that.
If only data was that chatty. I am conscious of the time, and we haven't got to any questions yet. So if
I wanted to come in,
I will leave. Go on then.
Yeah, we talked a lot about technology, but it's also the financial side of it. And circling back to your earlier question around, do you think this is real? Do you think is it overexposed in the media? So I'm not worried. I agree with you, Glenda. I'm not worried because I really see a change in, other areas as well. So boards, for example, they have gone from just talking to doing. A lot of boards, like Rotalk, the one I'm sitting is they having an ESG committee on board level. They are having head of ESG. They weave in their strategy, the ESG strategy, in their overall strategy as a key driver for growth. DCC board and EXCO, we don't think it's enough to just be carbon neutral for 3 years. We want to do more. So we want to work on the supply chain, scope 3, and also the investment market, the capital allocation. Now the investor community, they don't invest in company that doesn't have ESG as the core strategy. And that's really changed that I've seen. And just the last point is about the young generation. So most of you are younger than I am. You are so aware. So just a very personal example. When I moved from Vodafone to DCC, around a year ago, my, at that time, 16-year-old daughter said, "Well done, Mum. You've gone to a good company." And I said, what do you mean good company? Yeah, because they care about the environment. They do something that is good for the environment. And then she started to name and shame other companies that was not as good. So I'm absolutely sure that the younger generation, they know where they want to work. They really think these type of things are important. And so, yeah, they're not just choosing their company and employment for, maybe just financial reasons.
Yeah, good.
Okay. Are there any questions from the room that we can get to very quickly before we move on to our final keynote? We have one at the front here. Luke, if you could. Oh, there's just a microphone coming, just so everyone.
We can hear you, though. So.
We can hear you.
We can hear you, but maybe the people at the back can't.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was a really interesting discussion. My name is Ali Sharp. I'm from a C-suite thought leadership consultancy that looks after businesses on sustainability and a whole range of other issues. Just interested in your thoughts on the storage agenda, because I don't think we've touched on that really. So, to what extent can the industry? I personally have panels on my roof and all sorts of stuff, but as well as thinking about the efficient use of energy, how can we be storing it better? Because it's been virtually impossible for me at the moment to get a. I know this is a personal question, to get a battery or get some sort of storage capability because of Brexit. So how can the industry help consumers with that sort of thing?
I might take that, but I will start with, that's not my area, but I'll give you a comment. I think the overlap of the supply chain issues and the speed at which people want additional storage is a problem. And it's not just battery, it's electric vehicle. I've heard people waiting. I think there's a 300-day waiting list for one of the best chargers around. It's and I think that's a temporary year or two thing, and then it will start to even out. But the question, and by the way, there's lots of work going on to try and clean up those supply chains, and some companies looking at taking over the whole element of their supply chain so that they can prioritise, but that it doesn't create any more. It just means that certain companies get a bigger share, right? But the storage question, particularly battery storage and how large those batteries can go, and where to site them, and actually even the use of hydrogen if you can't store, is a topic that I guess is another session. My personal view is that it will be a blend, right? And you have to go forward with most. We will. The advantages of, although I will admit that the government decisions today may not help that, but the advantage of being able to pump back into the grid from your own property is financially rewarding, right? And you don't have to. It doesn't have to be with battery storage though, right? So there's some quite interesting. I don't know if any of you got the OVO tariff that you can. They actually control when you charge, so you don't store and put it back. They charge you later at night and guarantee.
Exactly.
And there's some quite interesting load control with what you've got as well as storage. But my personal view is it'll be a blend, and I do think I don't have a battery either, and I've been trying to get one, and it is really annoying, right? And I am not a supply chain expert, and I think trying to solve that would be with more than the 3 minutes we have left. But hopefully it helps.
Okay. Any further questions from the room? We have one just on the middle aisle. And if we can keep this relatively punchy, sir, that'd be appreciated.
I'm David Harmon from AMCL. We're infrastructure asset management consultants. And you asked the panel about whether utilities technology was the bad boy, in terms of sustainability, but mentioned wind farms and things like that. But I wonder whether the panel think that they can shift the blame more onto embedded carbon within the utility sector, and particularly we talk about the wind farm, the vanes and things like that. They've got limited life, and because they're made of glass fibre, they can't be recycled or anything like that. So, could utility technology sort of hide behind that and say, well, we're not as bad as the levels of.
By the way,
carbon.
when I made that comment, I meant technology as a whole, not utilities technology. and maybe I won't take every answer. I don't think utilities is the bad boy issue. I think they're leading it, but I do think there is, there are many unanswered questions that we still need to get through. And look, I remember being maybe 10 years ago sitting with a CEO of one of the big utilities and him saying, I'd love to do wind, but I can't make it work, right? And they are now the biggest investor in offshore wind, right? And actually the speed at which technology is moving, right? We just have to be really clear on what the issues are. And actually the government funding to resolve those issues is there, right? But if we're not facing into them and we're greenwashing them, we're not going to solve it.
There's also a huge, I think anyway, there's a huge challenge around the actual tracking and reporting of this accurately. So, Scope 3 emissions, the way that companies report the methodologies that they use, they still don't give you the granularity that you would need to be able to accurately say this is the embedded carbon and this is the life cycle of what I've invested in, and these are the implications of replacing now with a more efficient form of technology versus trying to extend the life cycle of what I've got. I just think in many cases, and again this is not utility specific, it's across the board, we're still working on building up the data and the methodologies to be able to make that definitive call as to which is the right decision here, and that's until you've got the data, it's really difficult to make those decisions in a reasonable way.
I think the shift is that now companies proactively work with that. Before it was like, we have to do it, But now what I see out there is that a lot of companies actually take this seriously. They want to do this, and they realize how important it is. And you mentioned supply chain. I think supply chain is really important. I think we have a big opportunity here to drive much more efficiencies out of the supply chain. And we have to, we have to have tighter, stronger partnership in order to together, drive out that and accelerate our targets, I think.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Glenda, Karin, Tilly, warm round of applause for all of them, please. Thank you so much.